Look at their faces when you stop reacting. The confusion, the discomfort, the almost desperate need to reclaim your attention. One day you're accessible, answering every text, jumping at their demands, explaining yourself endlessly, and the next, you simply withdraw. That single shift exposes the uncomfortable truth most people spend their lives avoiding. The world doesn't value what it doesn't have to earn. This pattern repeats everywhere, in relationships, at work, in families. The moment you stop being easily accessible, everything changes. The person who took you for granted suddenly can't stop thinking about you. The friend who drained your energy now wonders why you've gone silent. The boss who overlooked you now notices your absence. It's not coincidence, it's psychology. And once you understand it, you'll never approach relationships the same way again. By the end of this video, you'll discover the exact psychological mechanisms that make unavailability so powerful, how your excessive accessibility has been weaponized against you, and, most importantly, how to reclaim the power you've been giving away. The final insight might completely transform how people treat you forever. Here's the dark truth. Most people aren't reacting to who you are. They're responding to how easily they can access you. This isn't accidental. The more available you are, the less value you hold. The human psyche is built to chase what retreats, to want what it cannot easily have, to value what is rare. You've just never been taught to use this to your advantage. Think about how you operate right now. Someone criticizes you, and you immediately defend yourself. Someone withdraws attention, and you chase harder. Someone makes a demand, and you jump to fulfill it. Every reaction, every explanation, every attempt to please, it's all slowly eroding your value in the eyes of others. And the worst part, you think you're doing the right thing. Society has programmed this response deliberately. From childhood, you were taught that being good means being accessible, always helpful, always responsive, always accommodating, convenient for everyone but yourself. This conditioning wasn't for your benefit. It was to make you manageable, predictable, controllable, the compliant worker, the always available friend, the partner who never says no. But throughout history, those with true influence never operated this way. They understood something fundamental about human psychology that you've been denied. Power doesn't come from giving. It comes from withholding, not from being needed, but from being sought, not from reacting, but from watching others react to you. Carl Jung, one of history's most profound psychological minds, recognized this dynamic. He understood that most people seek external validation to fill an internal void. They believe if they make themselves accessible enough, valuable enough to others, they'll finally feel worthy. But Jung saw the fatal flaw in this approach. The more you try to make yourself valuable to everyone, the less valuable you become to anyone. This isn't just philosophical theory, it's practical psychology that plays out in your life daily. The coworker who's always willing to stay late gets taken advantage of. The friend who's always available never gets prioritized. The lover who's always giving never gets pursued. These aren't isolated incidents. They're manifestations of a psychological principle. We value what we have to earn, not what's freely given. The moment you grasp this truth, that your accessibility is actually diminishing your perceived value, everything shifts. When you stop being available to everyone, for everything at all times, you force others to confront your absence. And that absence creates something powerful, space for desire to grow. There's a profound difference between being valued and being used. Most people can't tell the difference because they've never experienced the former. They mistake being needed for being respected. They confuse being called upon with being honored. The harsh reality? If people only engage with you when they need something from you, you're not being valued. You're being utilized. Look at your relationships honestly. Who reaches out only when they need advice, help, or emotional support? Who disappears when you're struggling, but expects you to drop everything when they're in crisis? These aren't balanced connections. they're extractive ones. And they exist because you've trained people that your energy, attention, and care are available without limits or conditions. Jung identified this pattern in his work with patients. He noticed how many people became what he called servants to the expectations of others. These individuals had no firm psychological boundaries, no inner sanctuary protected from external demands. They were psychologically porous, and as a result, perpetually drained. This drainage isn't just emotional, it's energy depletion at its most fundamental level. Each time you respond instantly to a message that could wait. Each time you explain yourself when no explanation is needed. Each time you say yes when you want to say no, you're giving away pieces of your vital force. By day's end, you're exhausted, frustrated, empty, not understanding why. The answer is simple but brutal. You're too available for people who haven't earned access to your life. You've failed to recognize that your energy, attention, and presence are finite resources, and some of the most valuable things you possess. Yet you distribute them without discrimination, like worthless currency. This isn't about turning your back on humanity or becoming cold and distant. It's about becoming selective with your energy. It's about understanding, as Jung did, that individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, requires establishing boundaries around who and what can access your inner world. The most powerful people throughout history understood this instinctively. They didn't make themselves accessible to everyone. They didn't explain their actions unnecessarily. They didn't chase approval or validation. Instead, they created systems where others had to earn access to them, and in doing so, they increased their perceived value exponentially. Consider the leaders who command respect without demanding it, the artists whose work is sought after, not aggressively marketed, the individuals whose opinions carry weight without being forcefully imposed. What separates them from others? Not talent alone, not intelligence, but their selective accessibility. They've mastered what Jung called the aristocracy of the soul, the understanding that true value must be guarded, not given away freely. This selective accessibility manifests in several specific ways that you can observe and implement. First, emotional restraint. Those with genuine power don't reveal every thought, feeling, or reaction, not because they're repressed, but because they understand that mystery creates interest. When you constantly broadcast your internal state, you leave nothing to be discovered. Second, delayed response. The powerful never rush to answer accusations, criticisms, or even praise. They understand that immediate reaction signals vulnerability, while measured response projects strength. When accused, they don't defend. When praised, they don't gush gratitude. Both reactions would place power in the hands of others. Third, selective attention. Those with true influence don't try to please or impress everyone. They focus their energy on what and who truly matters to them. In doing so, they sidestep the psychological trap that drains most people, the desperate need to be universally liked, a need that inevitably leads to being universally taken for granted. So, what happens when you begin employing these principles? When you stop explaining yourself, when you delay responses, when you become selectively available. Initially, chaos. People who have grown accustomed to your accessibility will react with confusion, even anger. They'll test boundaries, make demands, attempt manipulation. This response isn't random. It's the predictable reaction of those who have lost access to something they took for granted. But if you maintain your position, something remarkable happens. The dynamic shifts. The same people who pushed against your boundaries begin to respect them. Those who demanded explanations stop asking. Those who expected immediate responses adjust their expectations. And most importantly, your perceived value rises dramatically in their eyes. This isn't manipulation, it's recalibration. You're not withdrawing to punish others. You're withdrawing to establish the true value of your presence. You're not playing games, You're ending a game that was being played at your expense. This distinction is crucial to understand. The ultimate paradox of human relationships is this: the more you give without boundaries, the less people value what they receive. The moment you establish limits on your accessibility, what you do provide becomes infinitely more precious. It's as if your selective withdrawal creates a vacuum that pulls others toward you with greater force than your constant presence ever could. Jung observed this phenomenon repeatedly in his practice. Patients who learned to withdraw their projections, who stopped seeking external validation, who established firm psychological boundaries, these individuals didn't become isolated. On the contrary, they developed deeper, more meaningful connections, not with everyone, but with those who truly mattered. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of becoming unavailable. It doesn't diminish your connections, it refines them. When you stop being accessible to everyone, you become truly available to those who deserve your energy. When you stop dispersing your power in 1,000 directions, you can channel it purposefully, where it will have the greatest impact. Consider how differently you approach things you've had to earn versus things given freely. The job you fought for versus the one handed to you. The relationship you pursued versus the one that pursued you. The achievement that required sacrifice versus the one that came easily. In every case, what you valued most was what you had to work for. Others approach you the same way. When you make yourself completely accessible, emotionally, physically, psychologically, you remove the element of effort. And without effort, there can be no true valuation. This doesn't mean becoming artificially distant or playing manipulative games. It means recognizing your inherent worth and requiring others to recognize it too. The practical application of this principle begins with small shifts. Stop responding immediately to non-urgent messages. Practice saying, "Let me think about that," instead of giving instant answers. Allow silences to exist in conversation without rushing to fill them. Decline invitations without elaborate explanations. Each small act of selective unavailability builds the psychological muscle needed for larger boundaries. As you implement these changes, watch closely what happens. Some relationships will wither. These were likely extractive connections that existed only because of what you provided. Other relationships will deepen. These people value you, not just your utility to them. And most importantly, your relationship with yourself will transform as you reclaim the energy you've been dispersing. This transformation won't be comfortable. Years of conditioning have taught you that your value lies in your utility to others. Breaking this pattern means confronting the fear that without your constant giving, you might not be wanted. This fear isn't irrational. It's the natural result of a society that rewards compliance and accessibility while punishing boundaries and selectivity. Yet pushing through this discomfort leads to something remarkable, what Jung called the paradoxical experience of freedom. When you stop being controlled by others' expectations, when you cease measuring your worth by external validation, when you become unavailable to those who drain you, you discover a form of power you never knew existed. This power isn't domination over others, it's sovereignty over yourself. It's the quiet authority that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by how accessible you make yourself. It's the magnetic presence that develops when you stop chasing and allow yourself to be pursued. It's the undeniable value that emerges when you become, in the truest sense, selectively unavailable. The ultimate test of this transformation comes when those who once took you for granted suddenly seek your attention. The colleague who ignored your ideas now wants your input. The friend who canceled plans repeatedly now pursues your company. The partner who neglected your needs now attempts to meet them. In these moments, you'll face a choice: revert to old patterns or maintain your newfound boundaries. The decision you make will determine everything that follows. If you slip back into unlimited accessibility, you'll confirm what they unconsciously suspected, that your withdrawal was temporary, a momentary aberration rather than a fundamental shift. But if you maintain selective availability, you establish a new dynamic permanently, one based on mutual respect rather than one-sided extraction. Jung believed that individuation, becoming psychologically whole, required this kind of boundary setting, not as an act of selfishness, but as a necessary step toward authentic relationship. Because until you value your own energy enough to protect it, no one else will value it either. Until you become unavailable to those who drain you, you cannot be truly available to those who deserve you. The truth is both brutal and liberating. When you stop being available, everything changes. Not just how others see you, but how you see yourself. The energy you reclaim, the power you recover, the presence you develop. These aren't just external shifts. They're internal transformations that alter your entire experience of existence. So ask yourself now, looking at your life honestly, how much of your accessibility is driven by genuine connection, and how much by fear of abandonment? How often do you say yes when you want to say no? How frequently do you respond instantly to people who make you wait? The answers will reveal how much power you've been giving away, and how much you stand to reclaim. The journey from unlimited accessibility to selective availability isn't easy. It requires facing fears, breaking patterns, and weathering the inevitable pushback from those accustomed to your constant presence. But on the other side of this transformation lies something invaluable: relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided extraction. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Perhaps no aspect of this becoming is more significant than learning when to be present and when to withdraw, when to give and when to withhold, when to explain and when to remain silent. Because in these choices lies the difference between being used and being valued. When you finally understand that your scarcity creates your value, that your absence generates desire, that your selective unavailability increases your impact, everything in your life will shift. Not because you've manipulated others, but because you've mastered yourself. Not because you've played games, but because you've stopped playing one that was rigged against you from the start. If this message resonated with you, if you're ready to reclaim your power through selective unavailability, subscribe to the channel, challenge yourself, rise above, become more. Like this video, share it with people who need to hear these truths, and let me know in the comments. Have you ever experienced how becoming unavailable changed how others treated you? Let's talk about it.